So Brian and Jason wanted Eric to make craft. I'm taking the position of grow craft, and Eric is taking whatever position he's going to take relative to craft. But I think mine kind of started with HDR projects. Kind of started out with these benches that I did. The University of Nebraska, reclaimed timber from an old warehouse that I fabricated my garage, and set them on the steel plates. And what compelled me at the time to do these benches at the time, I don't know. It's Tom. I mean, people were looking at me like, "What the hell is Hannah doing trying to get benches at HDR projects?" But nonetheless, we pulled it off, and it worked out pretty well. This is a view from inside the lab, looking through the window into the corridor with students sitting on these benches. Another one that I did was the stair in whole person healthcare. We really studied Renzo Piano stair in modern me in terms of all the detailing and it worked out really well. It's probably the best stair that I've done. I think stairs are kind of like furniture in buildings in a way. And we also did these custom brackets. So see, these are some of the other pieces that I've done since then. Usually on weekends and nights, but a lot of it's incorporating some repurposed materials, like the one on the upper right, a table base that we chopped and incorporated old tin flooring in the seat. This is kind of a cheesy project that we did for people. Tom and I were in the first interview for Google when we actually pulled it in. So don't let the marketing guys and the developers tell you that they pulled in all that Google work. We did it.
We were so hammered by Steve when we got done because of how we didn't do it right. He literally ripped us a new one when we got finished with the interview.
We were ready to get fired, but then when he heard we won it, oh, it's all good. No problem. But we manipulated the third wall system and incorporated our own custom copy. So all of the walls are the pre-engineered third products. We've also made in Canada here in Calgary. But you see some of the custom table. So in terms of craft, we'll talk about different levels of craft. For instance, this space happened to be based on Star Trek, which is cheesy. So we did the tables based on this, the old Star Trek logo. I had the top fabricated, base fabricated, and the only thing I did here was on-site lights, and all this is kind of put them together. So we'll talk about this kind of spectrum of craft, whether you're the guy sanding the wood or you're the guy just kind of designing the parts and pieces. A couple other shots there. The only reason I'm sharing this is because these don't get out to the public because we're not supposed to share them in the public. This is all internal HDRs that are very cool. So you can see some of that. We have various different colors for different spaces. But at the end of the day, when it comes to a job site, really the scale of like a non-craftsman to a craftsman all comes down to the amount of stickers we have now. Mine's on the left. I actually have a little bit of sticker in it from the craftsman on the site, so I do have a couple stickers on mine. And I encourage you to all, if you do spend a lot of time on the job site, to get your own product with your name on it. And maybe get it dirty a little bit so that because the white part has on site, you don't always get respect. But in terms of like some of the craftsmen I see that are sort of like artists without an audience, the steel erectors, these guys are, if you've ever worked with these guys, they're crazy. They all have nicknames, and they're sitting up on top of beams, barely tied off. In fact, there's a picture right there. The iron worker's got the rods along the holes up, and then masons. Also, artists without it. Their work doesn't get kind of covered up as much, but nonetheless, if you've ever tried to use mortar off a brick, that's difficult to do. And if you haven't mastered the tools, you're not going to be able to do it. This is a book I read about 10 years ago, where Matthew Crawford, he's actually making a case for the men in trades, as opposed to what he calls knowledge workers. So when it comes to to get a degree in like HR, working for HDR, you're kind of a knowledge worker. You're in a cubicle, you're just kind of pushing information around relative to a rule. But he's advocating that we should make stuff with our hands. really do it, really get into it, and there's really value in it, like really like a meaning in life, not just kind of pushing around information. So much so, after having read that book, when my son wanted to go into the trades, I said, yeah, go for it. That's him. On the left, he's a union apprentice electrician, and he takes pictures of his work as though it's artwork. So he gets to. Anyway, he's loving it. He loves the trades. He's super into it. He's drinking the Kool-Aid for the union, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to like how we are trained, this is any architectural studio across the world where we're hacking and we're gluing and we're cutting, we're really using our hands, making three-dimensional objects. This is how we are trained, and I feel like in some ways, some of us who are old school trained on drafting boards and pencils and paper, we were forced to use the computer instead of the cubicle. That became kind of a problem for me anyway. When we look at guys like Renzo, he has his picture taken in front of his shop. My guess is he's making these little architectural components or projects. He's not making the actual projects in his buildings, but he's making representations of it. Similarly, Tom Kundig, I don't think he's the guy, finishing the steel or fabricating the steel, but yet he's, making the architectural representations for these components. So that, in a sense, I think is our craft as architects. These are the things we make. We make models, we make orthographic projection, pictorial projection, storytelling. This is all a craft. I think what Tom does with his books is a craft. What Jason does with the videos, that's a craft. He's editing, he's making different parts and pieces together. So the idea of like mastery of the tools, when you master your tools, the tools don't get in the way of executing your craft as making architectural representations. Whether it's a table saw for Damien, whether it's grasshopper for Tim, who tells us he spends more time in Rhino than he does real life. Or Damien. He makes I love his attire, by the way. This is why during work or weekend so he's making beautiful objects. These are art objects. These are well-crafted architectural representations that I would buy as a result.
Yeah, I've got about 30 of those at my desk. I can upsell.
His daughter is inhaling sawdust right now, but we think that's going to be okay. So the idea of what he's doing, he has mastered the digital tools. He builds a 3D model of how he wants to build the physical model. So he knows exactly how he wants to build it. The digital tools, he's mastered those. They don't get in his way. He's able to execute. These are just these beautiful objects that, in my mind, are part of the craft of architecture. Or if you look at a Carlos Carpenter, you can tell he is using the tools to he's kind of teasing out the idea, chewing on an idea right there on a single piece of paper. It's almost like paper is expensive. He doesn't want to keep kind of changing the paper. Or if you're Brian Polchuk and you wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you got 9 different ideas that he's developed. Is it 6?
6 a.m.
6, 10, whatever. But it's crazy. The paper and the pencil don't get in his way. He can simply just think about the greater process and execute. So the whole idea of ideation and speed and facility within our craft is. Or Diego, who wasn't the guy that laid the bricks. Why is that changing? He wasn't the guy that laid the bricks, but knew enough about the bricks. We get it. I thought they were actually like turning the bricks, but no, the bricks have actually a different footprint. Where's he at? He's back there. For the Science Museum at Oak fabricated a couple different guardrail options in my basement to show the clients we want to be able to touch and feel it and not just have like an image on a screen to share. So I also wanted to point out to the steel directors how I wanted the ground edge to be finished with a certain product called this gun balloon that you have to get at an ammo store. So when I turned in that receipt to the ammo store, the accountant spaced go like, what the heck's Hamilton doing now? And stuff like that. The guns and ammo store. It's all good. I got it. It's a fun story. And then there's the execution of the stair. They didn't quite get that ground detail I wanted, so that was kind of a fail. And sometimes you just got to pick your battles on site with what you're going to fight for. They did get that little twisted bracket for the handrail, of which they didn't know how to do or want to do it. But we just told them, hey, you heat it up and you twist it. That's what they do. They hadn't done it, but so we forced them to do it. There's another book by David Pye, who I mentioned this to Eric. He talks about workmanship or risk, where at any moment the workmanship will ruin the job, or workmanship of certainty, where the quality of the result is predetermined beyond the control of the output. And there's a certain spectrum of which we work. I think the spectrums, it's not one or the other, but there's probably some place in there within that sort of workmanship. So I did a table for Lee Robertson a few years ago. We collaborated on it. This is what she wanted. I fabricated the base and had the wood top made. But one of the failures was the base was too long for how I wanted the prongs to sit on the base, so I had to take 3 inches out of the middle. So it's kind of like, it probably would have worked the way it was, but it wasn't the way I wanted it, so you keep kind of tooling it and reworking it. And then finally, some of you have probably read Johanny Plisma. He talks about the door handle as the handshake of the building, and this is an object that makes you want to touch it and feel it, right? The problem is that's AI too. This is all AI generated handrails. But the issue I have with it is that these are all two-dimensional images. They're not actually objects that you can touch. So at the moment, that's where AI fails. It's only making imagery. These are some of the other ones that AI did. That's all I got. That was really one time.
You did it.
Good.
Yeah. Jason is need to get set higher for the go next. It's in there. Right. So my despicable task is to debate this gentleman. Despicable task. For the 3 of you that don't know, craft is not what gets me out of bed in the morning. I do, and I'm sure our today's organizers thought it would be a laugh riot that I would talk about craft. I do work in teams, and the point of teams is to unite passions, because it's the way I understand on this side. Yeah. And what that means is that a team can help compensate for individual deficiencies. So let's just start with some definitions. Keywords here: care, skill, ingenuity for craft in general. But for craft as it applies to architecture, I really think of it, and I think you would as well, that it's an attention to construction beyond what's functionally required. So it's not just about keeping the building from falling down, okay? But the other thing, kind of split it over, it is intended to be noticed, if only by another architect, but it's intended to be noticed. That is key. And I do notice it, you know. I mean, you see buildings, you know, you talked about Renzo Piano, Thomas Pfeiffer, Kengo Kuma. When I see it, I photograph it, I notice it. And you would think in these slides that craft is alive and well. I don't believe it is. There used to be an age of craft, and that was many ages ago. And this isn't just historical nomenclature. Each of these ages was trying to do the same thing in a different way. It was trying to make order out of chaos, trying to find that cosmos within creativity to help us understand ourselves. So to make it less abstract, any bird can build a nest for eggs, but building a nest for gods, that is a very different thing. Architectural craft began as a way of ordering the cosmos, and the precision of that craft was magic to the ancients. it helped them to think that these structures at one point had been built by divinity. And we even used craft to order the heavens. But since the Middle Ages, we have many different ways of ordering our world. We have new ways of viewing our cosmos. Bricks and mortar don't have to do it all anymore. And it doesn't mean I don't take delight in bricks and mortar, but it's kind of a guilty pleasure. There's a bit of the nostalgia in it. So my first misgiving about craft is that it may be anachronistic. And maybe is the theme all the way through it. It's just me. I'm thrilled to be arguing with. But if it was anachronistic, how can we make it more timely? What is the chaos of our time that craft could help address? And come to the digital addiction, which was supposed to be what gave order to our time. But now we're so lost in our phones, we don't even notice reality. And in contemporary construction, there's a lot of new media now in terms of lighting and signage and wayfinding. How can we craft some of those new media to mediate from the digital world to reality, to bridge that one divide? So food for thought, number one. Number two is that I worry that craft may be egocentric, not egotistic, not at all. But what that means is that we think of the craftsperson like an artist, working as a lone individual on their work of creativity. That's a beautiful thought. A lot of lone artists, though, don't make a team or even a firm. There's a challenge there, and it's especially difficult when each lone artist thinks of themselves as a superhero whose knowledge of craft and materials means they're a real architect. And that's where craft can be divisive to a team. It's invoking that sense of the real architect. And in a sense, it's looking back to a golden age that never was, when architecture was important and the architect was powerful and stood alone. I don't believe that age ever was. I don't believe it's the reality now. I don't think as architects we truly are artists that can stand behind our work. I think of us more as choreographers of a truth, or better yet, integrators of passion. And keep in mind, nowadays, even superheroes collaborate. The third concern is that craft might be elitist. And again, maybe elitist. We like to think that architectural craft, like handicrafts, and some of the beautiful things you showed, began in the peasant and cottage economies of the West, of the East, etc. But the problem is, when it comes to architectural craft, these were the peasants that had a little more money. The truly poor live like this. So architectural craft is expensive. We can't get around that, which is why we tend to see it after the Middle Ages in palaces, and more palaces, and more palaces, to be technically a villa. But the key here is that it doesn't always have to be an ornate and embellished to be expensive. So, and also explains why we don't see it much in the history of public housing. So what can we do to avoid the Marie Antoinette moment with craft? How can we let it be less about the elite? Well, one thing that we can do is start restoring it back to the community. Think of local craftspeople, and yourself could be one, and maybe for another architectural firm, that do their talents like local muralists do, that we restore craft to its roots in the community. So that's another food for thought. Okay. A little concerned that craft at this time of the day may be irrelevant. Americans spend a lot of money on their houses, but craft, obviously, isn't something they really care about. That's not what they're paying for. They pay for location and size and all of these things. And even places of worship. I mean, unless you can live in England near a medieval cloister or a chapel, Americans tend to worship in places that look like that. And that's why they have to go to Europe for a couple of weeks each year to see some actual and how much better is HDR, Kingston office notwithstanding, there is not a molecule of craft in the LA office, okay? Now, the heart of this has to do with style. In the architectural styles that are based on the formal past, it's easy to read the craft as it is easy to read flaws. Take that third arch on the right and move it 3 feet further to the right. Everyone would notice. Oh my God, what did they do? There's a big gap there. What mistake did they make? move any one of these pieces 3 feet in either directions, up, down, right, or left. And it would be cake time with numbers. But most of us might not. Now, that does not mean this is an incredibly crafted building. I'm not a fan, but I can testify it is beautifully made. What it does mean is that architectural craft may no longer be the most viable visual and intuitive measure of architectural quality. So, how can we make architectural craft more relevant? Well, I always find that you become a lot more relevant if you've got something to teach. And if we, the Pompidou Center began its renovation this year. Here is craft being used to teach about the content of architecture, the challenges, the aspirations. What are our teachable moments that we can utilize craft to serve? Okay, this one seems a little weird. Craft may be distracting. We talk about the user experience. I talk a lot about the patient experience and the staff experience, I'm sorry. But we think in terms of storyboard, like you said, and much like this, we were creating a play. So let's say the concept is the hospital is like a well-appointed boat that is taking you across the dark waters of illness, okay? And around that story, we can build the stage sets, the entry, the reception, the amenities, the ascent up to outpatient waiting areas, as if you're coming to the arrival lounge of a cruise ship. But all of these are really sets that support the actor. And the actors in that environment are the patients and the caregivers. And they can have design. You know, there could be as much grandeur or rusticity as is needed to support the sense of the story. But when there's too much to pay attention to, you can't even find a soprano. So I think it's important that we prioritize craft for the story and not just for the sets themselves. And this last one's a real well. I'm sorry, that craft may no longer be really the responsible thing to do. Let's say we forget the users, we forget the Americans with bad taste, and say to ourselves that we have a duty to architecture and the history of architecture, the elements of our noble profession, that's our primary duty beyond all the rest. So unfortunately, at this time of the day, I think we all have a different primary duty to Mother Earth. And all the experts are telling us that we can't keep building one-off monuments to permanence. We have to tread more lightly on the soil and think less in terms of construction than assembly. A kit of pieces that we can put together for one project and take apart and use for another. This is the domain of prefabrication, of mechanical racks and repeatable rooms. It is not the domain of the lone wonderful craftsperson. And what it comes to is it's really the domain of the assembly line. And this is exactly the environment that your David Pye says is antithetical to craft. So is there no hope in this one area? Well, I see the work that you're, I tell you, Tom, you've come up a lot already this morning. I see Tom's work. And Tom strives to develop a craft about not just assembly, but disassembly. And that gives me hope. So here we go. 6 misgivings that may be part of an issue about craft, and 6 potential remedies. Craft that bridges our divides, craft that integrates, craft that engages the community, craft that teaches, craft that supports our story, and craft that disassembles. And we may hear in the rebuttal session that we're doing some or all of these right now, which would be great, and I wasn't paying attention. I would love that. I mean, at the end of the day, I am not the person to say no to anyone that can bring more beauty in the world. I just want it to mean more.
So Eric talked about the other day, the idea of craft being making something better than it needs to be. Right? At the end of the day, like that stair I showed at the First Healthcare, where we buried the shoelace between a C shape and the plates, you couldn't see how it was just sort of magically kind of came together, of which I studied. Could have just set the shoelace on top of the stringer and up. Maybe put the chair. Make that boy.
I'm glad you did.
But this
I don't know how to say these names.
Now he's being tricky. Now be careful. He's a lot smarter than you. I know that.
The other thing I think about craft, I was talking to these two nuns on the plane from Omaha too. They sat down, one never on the floor, the other one, 15 years, if they come, so they were interested in like, what do I do? Where do I go? We had like a 3-hour conversation. We both agreed. This was like conversation. Kind of looking at their Birkenstock shoes, and they're all kind of resold all the time.